halbwegs gutes Bild und dann muss ich nur noch in die Kamera schauen und hoffen, dass die nicht allzu sehr verschmutzt ist. Hello and welcome to the third video in my series of fundamental properties of movement, principles of movement, concepts of movement, however you want to call them, however I want to call them. I'm not decided about that yet. I just know it's very important to talk about this, very important, because why can it be that people have chronic pain for months or even years? They go from therapist to therapist, they see the best doctors, they get the best treatment available, and they keep having chronic pain issues. But at some point, the neurologist or their general practitioner will send them to me, and then I can help them within like 3, 5, something like this sessions, 1 hour sessions. How is it possible that I can do that? Like, am I such a gifted therapist? No, it's because this method, the Feldenkrais method of somatic education, is that good. And a Feldenkrais practitioner doesn't even have to be that good. He just needs to stick to the method, and then he can perform what Moshe Feldenkrais said. Looks almost like a miracle, but it's not a miracle because it can be taught. And there's principles. And as boring as it might seem, like to talk about these principles, I want to explain them to you because normally people don't do that. It's like a secret of the method, or maybe people don't want to explain them or don't know how to explain them. You won't find this in, for example, in physical therapy books, textbooks. You will not find that in osteopathy, medical textbooks, because this is about movement. We're using movement sequences to produce these results. Certain combinations of movements, and sometimes it's like 15, 18, sometimes more movements. It has something to do with the brain, with neurosciences. Yeah. So how's that for an introductory talk? I seem to be a little bit unnerved today. I'm sorry about that. Explaining these principles of movement is a difficult job. I think it has not been done before, so this is a first. And some of these principles don't have any names, so I need to name them, and I try to come up with good names where we can discuss all the names. So I'm going to explain 3 principles today, and they're always in combination with a movement sequence, and I will use movements I've shown here on this channel before. And if you study the Feldenkrais method or somatics, anything somatics, you know these lessons because these are like the most common lessons. Like these are like beginner's lesson, flexion and extension. So, the first principle of today, I called it pattern harmonization. So, I'm talking about flexion, a flexion movement, and there's parts to this, ingredients, you can call them. Make people aware of these ingredients without telling them the ingredients, but we lead them through these movements so they can discover how these movements feel, what they sense, so they can refine their sensing. So these are principles I've already talked about in the previous 2 movements videos. And the second principles I want to talk about today is signal highlighting. We don't move by ourselves, by magic, but because we have a brain, a nervous system with stuff inside, neurons, they fire. It's a whole complicated process until these signals arrive at the muscles, and then there's this highly complicated to explain process of how muscles contract and relax again. And when a muscle contracts, sometimes it doesn't relax back to the state as it was before. And this might be due to habit, might be due to a stroke like brain damage, might be due to how we think of ourselves, who we are. And the third principle I want to talk about today is the opposing pattern inhibition. Like you would know this if you're a physical therapist as antagonist inhibition, or in other words, when the central nervous system sends a message to the agonist muscle, the muscle causing movement, to contract, the tension in the antagonist muscle, the muscle opposing movement, is inhibited by impulses from motor neurons and thus must simultaneously relax. This neural phenomenon is called reciprocal inhibition or antagonist inhibition, however you want to call it, but I'm not talking about single muscles and I'm not talking about muscle group, I'm talking about a pattern of the whole body like flexion and extension. And these flexion and extension pairs, there's a lot of it in the body, you can look them up with Google, and once you realize this principle of movement, you can come up with any number of lessons targeting any specific area in the body with a pattern. Alright, so that was my talking part in sitting. At the moment, it's end of March 2020, the times are not easy, everything is in lockdown, the part I am living here is in full lockdown, all the shops are closed, all people panic, they are very afraid of the coronavirus, very afraid. So it's not easy, like there's much bigger challenges on this planet at the moment. Maybe this is a little bit reflected in my mood here in the video. So we retreat, we focus on the properties of movement, we learn a little bit of theory, and we will be able to use this in therapy and personal growth for ourselves on our path. Yes, so if you want to participate, please, as always, come to lie on the floor. That's one of the principles I was talking about in the first lesson, to free up resources so we can look at minute details. Okay? So please come to lie on the floor. So yeah, so come on. Do I need a pillow? I have a pillow here so I can talk to you, converse with you. So the first principle I want to work on is called pattern harmonization. So I still take the liberty, like to put on a mask and go for a walk outside. I do that. Like I'm one person walking. And I was thinking about this term harmonization because we could call it clarification. That's what most people do. They call it clarifying a movement. But for me, clarifying is more about understanding with your mind. But I want to involve all four components of action, as we call them. Moving, thinking, feeling and sensing. And for this, the word harmony, I love it. Like it's like in music or art or dance and harmony, everything fits together. And when we talk about flexion movement, how do we harmonize that? And so this is my workbook, Getting Better Day by Day. So these are free videos here on YouTube, and I have this textbook for sale. And there's 9 lessons with flexion and extension. But you can find many more, but of course I'm happy when you support me by buying this textbook. In these times, of course, even more. So let's start with flexion. And there's really so many lessons. But flexion means like the front side, this is our agonist, becomes short. But see, when a person tries to do this movement by lifting the head, and there's only movement in the neck and nothing else in the body. So we need to clarify this movement, because this is not, we don't want to like bend and extend the neck until it breaks, but of course not. We want to have a pattern for the whole body, and the pelvis must be involved in the breathing, and the chest and everything. So let's start from the beginning. Let's start with the eyes. So the eyes look down, and then the chin comes closer to the chest bone, and the chest bone depresses downwards. So the front side, the ribs on the front side, the intercostal muscles, they shorten, so the front side becomes shorter, like all the ribs come closer to each other. The pelvis tilts a little bit. There can be a little bit of a push through the feet. So that's the general idea. So I call it pattern harmonization. So everything works together. Yeah? And then we have all these variations, like putting the right ear into the left hand and lifting the head like this. So there's rotation involved, so that muscles that are usually inhibited, they get to participate in this movement. And then we have the elbow towards the right knee, or the elbow towards the left knee, to remind all the parts that could be involved to be involved in the right amount of speed, orientation in the right direction, and the right amount of contraction, so that everything works together harmoniously, you know? So this is the principles, and then there's so many movement sequences for that. The second thing I want to talk about is the signal highlighting, another very important principle. And there's a story, actually. Let me tell you this little story. Moshe Feldenkrais, he lived like last century, and he used stories for teaching. And nowadays, when we learn anything about teaching, we learn storytelling. But it wasn't like this before. He was this genius who used stories, who saw that stories are so important for storytelling. So the story about this is there was a boy who had a spastic hand, and this hand couldn't open. So the mother brought this boy to many doctors and many therapists, and they made a device for them to put like cables around every finger, and then the cables, they would pull on the fingers, and every day they would pull a little bit more, but so for the boy to open the hand. But this was very painful for the boy, but the hand was spastically contracted, and this is because there's a brain neurological issue that the neurons don't stop firing this. Yes, so it's always contracted. So finally the mother found Moshe Feldenkrais. And was Moshe Feldenkrais, he talked to the boy, he sat next to the boy, and instead of trying to pull his hand open, Moshe took his hand and he helped the boy contract even more. So Moshe just took his hand and placed it over the hand of the boy and made his fist stronger. Of course, the doctor screamed and the mother screamed, like, what are you doing? This is the wrong direction. But Moshe, of course, knew what he was doing, and he stayed like this for like 10 minutes, something like this. And he talked to the boy, they had a good conversation, they smiled, and then Moshe opened his hand, and the boy could open his hand. And everybody thought it's a miracle. But it's not. And this is why I call it signal highlighting, or we call it going with the pattern, or we can call it effort substitution, or we can call it giving support. So these are all official names or ways we can call this. We exaggerate a little bit, like Moshe was closing the hand of the little boy even more, and then the nervous system registers. I think this is what happens. The nervous system registers the effort, and it detects it doesn't need this effort, and it stops the signal. So the signal gets inhibited, and then of course the movement becomes possible. That's what I mean with signal highlighting. And let's get back onto the floor. So when we do this flexion movement, like in any of these variations, we're highlighting the signal of flexion, it becomes very apparent to our nervous system what we're doing, and then when we let go, the release will be more encompassing, more fully. The release will be stronger than when we try to stretch it into the opposite direction. Because we contract it, we highlight the signal, and then we stop the signal in a conscious decision. And this is why people, after like a couple of movements, after like a couple of minutes doing these kind of exercises, this is why we all, not just people, but this is why we all feel more relaxed, we all feel we come down to the floor more, we all feel we can let go more, and we feel better, and we feel refreshed, mentally refreshed also. And then after, we will stand up and we will feel taller and apparent to other people. We look taller, we look more upright with less effort, because actually there is less effort. So much, really, like doing this video with you, I really start to relax myself. I start to feel more happy. I think this kind of teaching, this kind of videos, this is also important to me. Just like as you value it, as you watch it, and I know you want to see my videos, and I need to do these videos because it really helps me. It really helps me to come back to a more neutral, like just to remove all this tension from my body, just to like through these few movements. So, okay. So we are in this together, and we're going to survive together. And if you have been following my channel for a couple of years now, I hope we will stay together for many more years. I hope we will be able to do this for many more years together. So you will see me age and grow, and I see your comments, and it's good. It's very good. Okay, what was the last thing? The opposing pattern inhibition. So it's the same thing. When we do this when we stay with flexion, so I do this flexion movement, so the front side contracts, like all these little details, everything works together, even with my breathing. So we do this, or we do this. But of course, there's the other side, the opposing pattern. So here, my back side needs to let go. The opposing pattern to flexion would be extension, like being on the belly, lifting the head, or lifting one leg, lifting both legs, something like this. So we have all these movements. So this is extension. The backside shortens. Also, we have this pattern harmonization with all these many hundreds of lessons that go into, like, there's so many lessons for flexion. And this needs to let go. We need to inhibit that by flexion. You know what I mean? Opposite pattern inhibition. So when I do the flexion, when I contract, when I shorten myself on the front side, of course the back side needs to lengthen. And it does lengthen because I'm going into this direction. I'm going into this direction. I'm going this direction. And with every time, the extensors let go. So Moshe Feldenkrais, he uses this often when he teaches extension. So when there's lessons where we do for 1 hour, we work on extension. And then at that time when Moshe was living, he didn't know about fascia yet in that detail like we know today. But he knew there's something that contracts. And he told his students, if you do like 1 hour of extension movements, and then you go home, and maybe 2 days later, you will have back pain. Because this extension pattern just continues, and it continues to That's what it does. And then after a couple of days, maybe 2 days, 3 days later, it hurts. People get back pain and don't know why. And they can't relate it, of course, to like 40 minutes of exercise they did like 3 days again. Doesn't make sense. But that's how it works. And that's why he uses, like in every extension lesson, he will do like half a minute of a flexion movement to inhibit this pattern of extension. So we learned what we needed to learn, and then we inhibit, we stop the pattern and return to a position of being neutral. Neutral is a principle I mentioned in the first video. And so we finished today. And we will use these principles, and you will be able to see these principles in other lessons, in every lesson. It's always there, but just nobody talks about it. And I think if you want to design lessons, or if you want to understand how does this work, why do I feel so good after such a lesson? Why does this improve my life so much? So it's these principles that make this possible. All right? So now I feel better. I'm still alone in my home, still in isolation, but I can tell you, I think I will visit a friend tonight. And I will call my father on my phone. Please take good care of yourself. Self-care. And it is my pleasure to make these videos and my pleasure to have you. So if you like this video, please leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, share, and see you in the next video.